few months back, one of my friends sent me a link to an article, and she wanted to know what I thought about it. The article was titled, "A Carnivore Diet is More Vegan Than a Vegan Diet." I'm pretty sure that she's not on the carnivore diet, but I guess she just wanted to hear my take. I felt like it was my duty to provide her a detailed response. As I was writing my response, I realized it would actually make for a pretty good video script. And now's the time to fulfill that thought. When I first saw the title of the article, I thought it was ridiculous. But I told myself to try to reserve judgment until after I read it. Maybe there would be a valid or interesting argument in there. There wasn't. So the article is basically about how there are animal deaths involved in plant farming, like mice and snakes and small creatures that get killed by tractors and farming equipment. It's not really a new argument. People have been trying to debunk veganism with it for a while. This article's angle was that because of those rodent deaths, if you eat an entirely beef diet, the amount of animals killed per person is lower than if you're a vegan, making it more vegan. First off, they're using people eating entirely grass-fed beef as their ideal scenario. There are a few problems with this. There aren't enough grasslands in the world to support 14 billion cows. 14 billion because they say that in this article each human just needs to kill 2 cows a year to survive. But in reality, you'd need more than 14 billion. You'd need breeding cows because you can't kill off 100% of your cow population and only eat 1-year-old cows. But we'll put it at the low end, 14 billion. According to www.ncrs.usda.gov, who certainly has stakes in the animal agriculture business, so if anything, their numbers are going to be on the optimistic side, it takes 1.5 to 2 acres to grass feed 1 cow. There are 36,677,592,320 acres of land on Earth. But 57% of that is inhospitable mountains and deserts. So you've got 15.5 billion acres of potentially usable land. And that's if you converted all usable land into grasslands. But you need 28 billion acres for 14 billion cows. And if you did want to convert all usable land into pastures, then you have to cut down the world's forests, killing all the animals that live there. And animal agriculture is already responsible for 91% of rainforest deforestation. And that's without the entire world living on a carnivore diet. This article wants to paint veganism as secretly sinister or dishonest, while conveniently neglecting to mention that this carnivore diet proposal, if actually adopted, would mean killing off the vast majority of animal life on Earth to make it happen. Really, it's a logistics issue. The carnivore diet this article is promoting does not scale. It's completely ridiculous and unsustainable, whereas we can feed the world multiple times over with the amount of edible plants we currently produce. The logistics issue there is transportation, payment, and ownership of those plants, which would also be an issue for world feeding on this carnivore diet. And it's not even just this carnivore diet that doesn't scale. It's any carnivore diet. Even if you ditched the grass-fed beef idea and wanted to feed the world on grain-fed animals, you would still need to clear-cut habitats worldwide to do that. Then there's the whole issue of the environmental impact of grass-fed beef, and animal agriculture in general. It takes far more water and land for grass-fed beef versus grain-fed beef. And grass-fed cows emit 500 times more greenhouse gases. Really, carnivorism is an extremely inefficient method of energy transportation. Rather than eating an animal who has to eat a lot of plants, you could just eat the plants directly, which would mean less necessary farmland. Another issue is, carnivores like to claim that they can be healthy on animal products alone. And this article is taking it a step further by using only beef. But have you seen a carnivore's cholesterol? They are probably far more likely to die early of heart attacks if nutrition science means anything. In this article, they used Cronometer to get their nutrition info. So I did too. Putting in 2 pounds of grass-fed beef, like they suggest, shows some incredibly lackluster nutrition. With such a diet, you'd be getting barely any folates, no vitamin A, C, or D, barely any vitamin E or K, hardly any calcium, not enough omega-3 or 6, not enough vitamin B1, no carbs, and a shit ton of fat and cholesterol. I don't think I'm being unfair here. People like to argue against veganism by claiming there are nutrient deficiencies, which there certainly can be. But the beauty of veganism is that it isn't actually a specific diet. You can be an unhealthy vegan or a healthy vegan. You can be a raw vegan, keto vegan, whole foods vegan, junk food vegan, whatever. There are over 20,000 species of edible plants. A great variety, even if you only include the ones at your local grocery store. The diet this article mentions is extremely specific. Even if it weren't limited to only beef, it would still be quite limited. So I bring these deficiencies up because, while vegans are quite fine with supplementing where necessary, the author of this article doesn't seem to be. After all, if you supplement with plant foods, you're not on the carnivore diet anymore, where the supplements vegans use are just more plant foods. This article is comparing an ideal version of the carnivore system to the current version of aspects of the vegan system, which, in fairness, isn't even a vegan system. Most of the farms that are producing plants aren't vegan farms. They're just farms. And the majority of the people buying what these farms are producing also aren't vegan. It would be much more fair to compare realistic scenarios with realistic scenarios, where people logistically can't live off 2 pounds of grass-fed beef a day, but they can live off plants. Or it would be more fair to compare an ideal scenario with an ideal scenario. For instance, if the whole world were vegan, obviously there wouldn't be any farmland mouse deaths. Veganic farming is the practice of not killing animals in any stage of your food production. And it is possible. There are farms that currently do it. There also wouldn't be a need for pesticides. Pesticides really only became necessary as humans started doing monoculture farming, which is largely to feed animals the large quantities of food they require if we wish to eat them in large quantities. A healthy ecology makes pesticides unnecessary. If you've got a farm where you rotate your crops and you plant one type of crop next to another, large populations of insects who feed on a particular type of plant won't develop. There are natural checks and balances to prevent one species from dominating. Besides, vegans are the ones always pushing for ever-increasing accountability and ethics in the production line. If you tell a vegan about the dark side of the thing that they just bought, they're likely going to stop buying that thing outright, or find a more ethical alternative. If you tell a meat eater that extra animals died in the process of making their food, I don't see what reason they would have to care and push for change in the industry. They already signed up for at least one animal death in their purchase. Why would they care about another? Honestly, most of the argument this article is making comes from a bad faith desire to pull a gotcha on vegans rather than actually caring about the mice death. It fits into the realm of good news about your bad habits. Unfortunately for the world of vacuum logic, there is no impartiality in veganism. Everyone either eats meat or chooses not to. If you choose not to, someone can claim that you're biased. But what of the much more present and deep-seated meat-eating bias? Who is more trustworthy and who has more reason to lie? The cigarette smoker telling you smoking cigarettes is not only not bad, but good? Or the ex-cigarette smoker telling you smoking cigarettes is bad? In this analogy, cigarette smoking is so ingrained into culture that the minuscule amount of people who have never smoked a cigarette are perceived to be the most biased of them all. Another important factor that this article doesn't seem to think is relevant is intentionality. Which is less ethical? To kill something on purpose, or to kill something by happenstance? If I went out tomorrow and murdered one person, versus if I was driving to work and accidentally killed 2 people on the way, which makes me a worse person? It seems to me that only when people are attempting to refute veganism do they say that killing intentionally is better. People say the most insane, psychopathic things in an attempt to score points against veganism, not realizing that if their arguments were transferred to a human context, they'd be completely evil. This is a contentious philosophical issue. It's consequentialism versus deontology. Does the end result matter, or does the intention matter? Obviously they both matter, but this article seems to suggest that only the end result matters. The end justifies the means. Do an evil act for what you would perceive to be a good outcome. It's completely utilitarian. While I do think there's room for a certain amount of tempered, balanced out utilitarianism, it's ultimately the domain of movie villains. Pay any price for the desired outcome. Whereas deontology is always the domain of movie heroes. Don't let a single ally die if you can possibly avoid it, because to do so is wrong, and will risk our own lives and the entire mission to ensure that we don't slip up on our moral code. Utilitarianism is kill one person to save multiple. And perhaps that could be a reasonable argument. Except, as I described before, you'd have to clear-cut forests and habitats to make room for this absurd number of animals to feed a population of carnivore humans. The situation isn't actually what the author is trying to make it out to be. It's not kill one to save multiple. It's flat out just purposefully kill multiple. And if you think I'm not arguing the point, or I'm making a straw man of it by talking about a worldwide population of carnivores, then I ask, what is the purpose of this article? Is it to say that a handful of people on a super special carnivore diet can manage to kill fewer animals than vegans? If that were even true, great! But so what? Does it scale? If not, how is it an argument against veganism? Because a small-scale attempt of an alternative isn't much of an alternative. I can cause even less animal death by eating only out of dumpsters. Can the entire world eat out of dumpsters? No! There would be no way for food to end up in the dumpsters to begin with. So it's not really a solution. I can kill myself and cause the least amount of animal death of all, excluding my own death. What I'm trying to show here is that this article is making a dishonest argument. The system of veganism is a system of constant improvement. The goal is to reduce animal death, suffering, and exploitation. Of course, it's not currently a perfect system, nor will it likely ever be. There are still animals that die. But the very setup is about progressing so that on each step of the way you can learn a less and less harmful way of living. However, a carnivore diet includes animal death in its very nature. The entire system revolves around it. To remove animal death is to remove the system. Additionally, the very act of progressing away from animal death is in a strange conflict with the spirit of the system. If you want less animal death, are you not admitting that animal death is bad? But then you continue to hold it as the only pillar of your diet. Also, whether accidentally, purposefully, I don't know, this article is misunderstanding the definition of veganism to, once again, try to pull a gotcha on vegans. The definition from the Vegan Society is a way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. The part that this article doesn't seem to understand is exploitation and cruelty. While it may be tragic for animals to die as a side effect of agriculture, which I already stated isn't even a necessity and will only decrease as more people start to care about animals, it is not exploitation or cruelty. These animals are not enslaved or even kept track of. They just simply live there. And these deaths aren't intentional. So it would be a stretch to classify them as cruelty. The reason this definition of veganism says as far as is possible and practicable is because it understands that animals will inevitably die, but the goal is to minimize intentional killing. Unintentional killing is a thing that's important to minimize too, but the top priority is what's intentional. So with this definition in mind, a carnivore diet most definitely does not exclude exploitation and cruelty to animals. It depends on it. This article is promoting raising cows for slaughter. Just think about how twisted and cruel that idea is. You're born, probably forcibly removed from your parents, but if not, it's still fucked up. Live out your life as a captive. Your relationship with your captors will vary, and by the time your body is developed enough, but long before you would have naturally died, you get murdered by the very people who sheltered you, and then eaten for enjoyment. As much as this article wouldn't like to believe that it's true, stating something as an incontrovertible fact does not make it incontrovertible, or even a fact. The language in this article seems like it's trying to suggest that animal death from plant agriculture is entirely due to vegans, but vegans make up the very small minority of all people who buy plant products. They say, over 25 times the number of rodents are killed per usable kilogram of protein from grains than from meat. But what are the majority of the world's grains used for? For feeding farm animals. They frame their section on pesticides and amphibians dying as directly the fault of vegans, and only vegans. But it has next to nothing to do with vegans. Vegans aren't demanding pesticides be used. In fact, vegans are probably the most likely people to be against the use of pesticides. And why are pesticides used so much? Or even at all? Monocrop farming and misguided pest control. But mass killing insects is definitely not vegan. We've been dousing the world in poison long before vegan was a word anyone knew. The author of this article even brings up the book Silent Spring as some sort of argument for why veganism is to blame. There is nothing in that book about veganism. Nothing at all. There is nothing to suggest that vegans are more responsible for pesticide use than anyone else. And actually, they're far less responsible because one of the main reasons anybody goes vegan is because they give a shit about the environment. It's clear that whoever wrote this article and this website started from, I fucking hate vegans. How can I twist the truth to make it seem like things are their fault? Half of this article is just mentioning what's wrong with the animal agriculture industry, or the agriculture industry in general, and then blaming it on vegans. They also try to claim that almond milk is less ethical than cow milk. Direct exploitation and death of cows aside, cow milk uses far more water than almond milk. Plus, people like to rag on almond milk all the time. It's not the only plant milk there is. If you've got some issue with almond milk, fine, use something else, like oat milk. And before I finish, One last thing to think about. What type of actions does veganism encourage? What type of future would it lead to? More concern for the environment and compassion for all things. More awareness of what one is eating and how one's actions affect the world. A constant attempt to keep your actions in alignment with your beliefs. And a constant attempt to decrease exploitation of all life. Why are any of these things bad? Wouldn't they make for a better future? Why do people feel the need to fight against any of these things and make attempts at claiming that killing things purposefully is good? Well, that's really all I've got to say about that article. I would recommend that you read it for yourself, just so you don't only take my word for it, and that you can see for yourself how flawed their argument is. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then feel free to watch some more or subscribe to my channel, and if you really want to help me out, then you could share this video or any of my other videos to somebody you know. Once again, thanks for watching, and see you next time.